back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I'm here to review a couple more of the SPFBO books that I had in my batch, and then I'm going to be cutting these ones because unfortunately they weren't quite finalist worthy. However, I liked all of the ones in this video a lot, and there was definitely something that I enjoyed about each one uniquely. So I'd love to hear if any of these appeal to you, whether you've gone to pick them up and what you thought of them if you do, because I do think there's something about each of these that was a little bit more interesting than some of the other books in my batch. So let's get started. The first one that I'm going to review is by Jessie Teller. This is Legends of the Exiles, and it's quite an interesting format for a book because it's very different to a lot of the others in that it's kind of 4 short stories, all that interweave together slightly through the characters and through the world, but they don't really have an awful lot of crossover. There's just subtle things that weave these characters together. I will say straight off that there is a trigger warning for child rape in this, so if you're not interested in reading books with that, definitely steer clear. However, with that being said, I do think this starts off like quite a slow read. A bit heavy for me, I think, because at first you're kind of thrown into things and you don't really know who's who, and it takes you quite a while as a reader to understand who's who and how they're connected to the other people in the story and kind of what they're all working towards as well. I do think the story of Helena, who is the very first character that we follow, is quite an easy one to get into. She's from a small village, and although she's not personally the most likeable of characters, her plot is one that moves along fairly quick. I kind of wish that I could have seen a little bit more of her story, because I feel like just when you're really getting into it is when it kind of is cut off and the author decides that that's the point he's going to cut the story short. I have respect for him doing that and changing to a new character, but I also feel like if a good thing is there, why cut it off so early? The next novella focuses on Jocelyn. She's haunted by dreams and wild imaginings and nightmares, and she seems to travel to a new world where she finds this other girl who's in a similar situation and befriends her. Personally, feel like this one was the weakest of the stories. It didn't really work that well for me, and I found myself not enjoying her plot as much as the other women who we follow. The third one was a very sad but intense story. This focuses on Ellen, who is the victim of rape as a child, and she kind of sinks into depression, isolation, and eventually into recovery. She makes a home for herself away from everyone, and she takes a long time to really be drawn back into society. It was my favourite of all the stories. I liked her the best, and I could definitely sympathise with her and her predicament over the years of trying to process and deal with this in a world that doesn't really want to hear what happened. I really respected her and I sympathised, and I liked her plot overall. Finally, we have the character of Rachel, who's quite interesting as she's been raised in a world where women are very much the dominant, but she gets taken away by her father and kind of introduced into his world, and there she is not dominant anymore, and she is quite frustrated by this. I did like the moments of family between her and her brothers and her father. I feel like they have a good banter and a good believability to them, which was a lot of fun to see, and there were some nice little highlight moments throughout this particular plot line. In the end, I think this had a lot of potential. It had some things I really enjoyed and some things that I didn't enjoy quite as much. I think it's definitely some stylistic choices that didn't work quite as well for me personally, but overall it has some very nice heartfelt moments with some of the characters and some laughable moments as well, which I enjoyed. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and I, for that reason, gave it a 3.5, which for me is 7 out of 10 for SPFBO. So the next book I read was called Dragon's Source, and this one has a dynamic that I've definitely seen done before, where there is a young girl who is in need. She has a big secret about having magic, which she should not be having. In this world there's a thing called the taint, and if you have it then people come and try and wipe you out essentially, and she obviously has this taint. She hasn't told anyone, including her very best friend, and she's trying to keep it hidden, but one day a new person comes into town who is called Stekin, and he offers her the chance to run away and escape from this little village that she lives in if only she will help him with her powers. So they kind of go on this adventure and they start their journey away from this small village, and they are being hunted constantly because someone knows that she has the taint, and it's kind of their adventure of kind of just day-to-day survival. But I enjoyed this one. It certainly feels familiar to me. It had echoes of some of the stories I've read before where it's kind of this adventure, this race against time almost, and I enjoyed that about it. However, I don't think it really captured my attention as much as I wanted it to. Prior to this journey, Arten has two very good friends in the village, her best friend and then her best friend's sister, and it's quite lovely to see like a friendship in fantasy, because you don't often get them, especially like really nice, well done friendships, and I think this one was that. I was kind of sad to leave the two friends behind and for her to go on this journey with Stekin, because I kind of feel like the adventure that she could have had were her friends involved would have been a very different adventure. But with that being said, I think Stekin grew on me as I went further through the book. At first I found him quite standoffish, and I think our main character does too, but over time she starts to learn more about him and kind of why he's that way and what he's really working towards, and that was where the plot became a lot more interesting. I do think the pacing is nice. I never really felt bored whilst I was reading it. I felt like it moved along at a good pace. I constantly wanted to know where it was going to end, and the reveals I kind of saw coming. It was kind of obvious to me by that point what was going to be announced, but I don't think that was a bad thing necessarily. I still enjoyed the book on the whole, and I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5, which is 7 out of 10 for the SPFBO. So I definitely think this one is one that people would enjoy. The next one I want to talk about is Bones and Bourbon. This one was a weird story. It has an urban fantasy slant to it, I think, but it's definitely different. I certainly didn't expect it to be as engaging or entertaining as it turned out to be. We follow two brothers, and they are called Retz and Jared. Retz is the younger brother. He has always grown up with a voice in his head who is called Noun, and this voice is kind of like a demon or something like that. They're not quite sure what he is, but he was put into Retz's brain from a very young age, and so they have constantly had to kind of coexist. And Nalum is a monster. Like, literally, he just loves torturing people. He is horrible, he is awful, but he knows he has to kind of stay on Retz's good side most of the time so that Retz does not fight him, as he is kind of housed within Retz's mind. And so they have a strange kind of bond and a strange kind of relationship. They sort of trust each other, but also definitely don't. It's a weird dynamic, but it worked quite well, and they have quite snarky, kind of sarcastic conversations very often as well. The older brother is called Jared, and Jared is a guy who is just trying to help out his brother. He goes away with his father to kind of try and find a cure, but whilst he's away, all sorts of terrible things happen, and you learn about these things over the course of the book, so I won't go into details, but things happen and he gets cursed, and his kind of journey takes some weird turns. But he does meet the love of his life along the way, and they become very much a part of this book, and I loved seeing their relationship as it went on as well. It's an LGBT relationship, which is great, and I just enjoyed their banter with each other. Retz also has the power to manipulate bones. They have this weird power where they can kind of have super strength, and yeah, bones definitely seem to be a pretty prevalent part of this story. They can manipulate bones in people, and with like dead bones they can do all sorts of things. So it's a weird concept. Equally, Bourbon is a topic of much conversation between Jared and his partner, because every time they finish something they want to have a drink of Bourbon, and basically they never finish this quest, so they're always just talking about it. What I liked about this is it's a fairly solid pacing. The adventure feels like it's a bit silly but also very entertaining, so it works quite well, and I definitely found once I got into the rhythm of these characters, I liked their plot and how they were kind of playing off each other. There was actually some concept art at the end of this book, which I really enjoyed. It was quite similar to how I'd envisioned most of the characters, but a few of them were a bit different, and that was quite amusing to see. I do think this needs a bit of an edit to be a super strong book, but I did enjoy it, and I do think it will be a read that a lot of people, especially urban fantasy readers, would really enjoy. So I gave this 3.75 out of 5, which is 7.5 out of 10 for SPFBO. So I definitely recommend this, and I think it's quite a different read for a lot of people, but one I reckon a lot of people will enjoy as well. The next one I want to talk about is called Free Agent. This one follows a young boy who gets sucked into a game of gods and monsters. He is a gamer called Kieran, and we're following him as he gets pulled into this magical world called Mylad, which is the setting for the Game of the Gods. The world that he enters is fully unlike the world of Earth, and it's very different. It's based similarly to a video game that he's played in the past, so that's quite an interesting twist that he is actually a gamer, and he's given items and an inventory. He's tasked with leveling up, and he even completes quests along the way to kind of gain adventurers and gain status in this world. His adventure is quite a unique one because he is actually a free agent, therefore he doesn't have an alliance to any particular god in this world, which means he could really shake up the balance from those who have been called in by gods to compete in the game. It's kind of a thing that happens a lot. Each god gets a sort of warrior of sorts to call in from Earth and play and compete in this game. And he's a bit of an odd case. He doesn't normally have a free agent in the world. What I found whilst reading this is that it didn't really get going for a little while. However, I did ultimately really enjoy this book and I thought it was a lot of fun. It certainly has a bit of a lit RPG feel to it, and I've previously enjoyed a couple of lit RPG books from like SPFBO, so I liked those elements for sure. And I do think that the character, as he develops and he gets more skills and qualities, he becomes more likeable and more interesting overall. It was a slow progress and I liked that because I felt like that's more believable than just ranking up straight away. However, I do think maybe the beginning needed a little bit more of a hook to get you in quicker to the story. Once it gets going in this world, I do think it has that, but I just felt like it was slow at start. I think Kieran works as a character very well because he is just as lost as the reader when he first gets thrown in here. He doesn't have a clue what's going on and he has to muddle through as much as we do. So as he learns, we learn as the reader. I am curious about this world and kind of the adventure that carries on. I did have a look straight after finishing this to see if book 2 was out or not yet, and it wasn't, but I would definitely read book 2, which I think is a great pro to the author. I really enjoyed the ending, and especially as I got more into it when the book went on, I definitely would read the next one in this series because it felt like a very fun idea. It's not something that I haven't seen before, like going into a video game style lit RPG world, but it was fun and I enjoyed it. There were a few small grammatical things, but in general it was very pleasing to read and I liked it a lot, and I would give this 3.75, which is 7.5 out of 10 overall for SPFBO. The next one I want to talk about is The Black Lily. This one is an assassin story and it's a little bit different from what I was expecting, so I really enjoyed that. The premise could be very predictable. When you hear about the blurb, it feels like it could be a very predictable story, but I did find with this one it was written very cleanly, and I found that by the end of the book I certainly wanted to know what was going to happen next, and I liked that about it. It's the story of the Black Lily, an infamous assassin who is the best in the guild, and she is sent on a mission to kind of infiltrate a palace and get close to the king and the prince in order to kill them. The guild wants this to happen so that they can change the fate of the kingdom forever. What I like about this one is that unlike a lot of assassin books, Lily as a character felt like a very relatable and easy main character to get behind. She has a very realistic personality because of her past, which you learn about as you go through the book. And I think a lot of the time you read stories where the main character just feels a little bit flat. I've mentioned that a few times in my reviews and criticisms of SPFBO books, that sometimes the characters just feel flat, and Lily did not feel flat. I think she makes some surprising choices along the way that I liked because they felt like they were a bit more considered and a bit more interesting than typical fantasy assassins would make. And of course there is a romance in this story, which felt pretty predictable to me from the beginning of the book, but with that being said, I like the way that Alec and Adrian's personalities were developed as we went through the book and through their proximity to Lily as well, and I enjoyed seeing how she interacted with both the king and the prince in different ways to kind of get what she needed. I think my main complaint with this is just predictability. It is predictable. I do think if you've read any other assassin stories, you can probably predict where this one might go, and therefore it didn't have that original factor that I would have liked. But with that being said, the story itself is very pleasurable to read. It's not a difficult read and it feels like it's very engaging, which is nice. There's not really magic in this. It's more of a sword than a sorcery story. Definitely focused more on that side of things. But it's fun, it's light, it's easy to enjoy, and I liked it for those reasons. I also liked the relationship between Alec and Adrian, who are brothers, but they have quite different personalities and quite different opinions on things. So it was nice to see that they were not one and the same cookie cutter kind of characters. They actually had their own opinions and their own thought styles, and I like that for a reader. It felt a little bit more fresh. I like it a lot. It has some erotic scenes, which make it probably more adult than YA, but the pace and tone are both pretty easygoing overall. I think if you like assassin stories, you'd probably enjoy this, and I am keen to know where book 2 would take this story, so I again gave this 3.75, which is 7.5 out of 10 overall for SPFBO. And the final one I want to talk about in this video is called The Lone Wolf. This one is a very Lord of the Rings-ish sort of story in that it has orcs and ogres as main kind of races that we follow, and these creatures live largely outside of society unless they are a kind of half orc or half ogre. The feral forms of the beasts are very much wild. We follow 3 major characters. We have Remonce, who is a main character who is a human teen. We then have Kaladin and Quinn, who are 2 sort of brother-like characters, and they are gentlemen procurers, aka thieves for hire, but I really like the term gentlemen procurers. It makes me laugh every time I see it in the book. They don't know one another at first, but when there becomes a big orc problem in the area, they kind of have to work together to try and solve this problem. The characters definitely get developed as the plot goes, and whilst I found Kaladin was super over the top and totally verbose at times and really spouted a load of nonsense, I ultimately enjoyed his kind of skewed sense of humour and his skewed but honourable sense of right and wrong, I think. Quinn is a lot more mysterious out of the 2 of them, and I kind of feel like they have that banter that Hadrian and Royce have from Michael J. Sullivan's books. So if you like that kind of a duo, then I would say that Kaladin and Quinn are pretty much that, but in their own versions of that. Remonce is a pretty typical boy out of his depth. He goes through a lot in the very early part of this book, and he is kind of the one to raise the alarm about the orcs, but he's also the one that is kind of suffered a lot of loss over the course of the early bit of the book. So he has quite a sort of typical battle with himself and with what is right and wrong and whether he should even continue on. So I liked his story, but I do think it's predictable. I think with a really good edit, this could be a stronger, kind of tighter read overall, and I definitely feel like there is potential here to get a really nice story overall. I like the orcs being the focus. I think it's always fun when it's not just dwarves and elves who are the typical, so it was nice to see that. And again, I gave this a 3.75 or 7.5 out of 10 for SPFBO, so I definitely recommend this one as well, which means that all of these books that I've talked about in this video are really worth reading, and I'd love to hear if you guys do pick any of them up, what you think of them, or just let me know in the comments which ones appeal the most to you. Thank you all so much for watching, and do check out my next video, which will be announcing my semi-finalists and my finalist for this year's SPFBO. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.